you know, for a few years, we were really going along nicely with statically pre-generated sites for the most part, and adding JavaScript and interactivity when we needed. And then it went full circle again. And now we're just like server-side rendering everything, and everything's shiny and fancy and new, and all the frameworks have all the features. And so now we're back again trying to defend why that's too complicated and why you don't always need that.
This is What the Jam, an interview series where we're finding out what's next for Jamstack. Find out more at thefutureofjamstack.org. I'm excited to have Salma Alam-Naylor here today. So Salma has worked for a number of Jamstack companies like Contentful and Netlify. She was the 2021, she won a Jammie for Community Creator Award. And she did that through her prolific stream, where she's building a bunch of projects on stream, right from scratch, often with a Jamstack approach. So really excited to have Salma here today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mike. It's great to meet you.
You too. Let's start off with what does Jamstack mean to you?
Jamstack for me is a way for people to get into tech and get started really easily without having to worry about too many tools and too many server configurations and too much nonsense getting in the way. Jamstack is essentially, you know, you can make a Jamstack site with a single HTML file. And what better way to get started with web dev than a single HTML file served from a CDN somewhere? And that's what I think is really valuable about it for me, because it's accessible, right? It's not overcomplicated, and it works really, really well. And it lets people into the concept that you can make a website with the simplest of approaches, and you don't need all the fancy bells and whistles that a lot of other tooling and a lot of other kind of people in the ecosystem are shouting about all the time. So I just think it's a really great way to get into things, and it's a really kind of warm and cozy way to just put something online, because there is no better feeling than putting a website online really quickly. You talked about in my streams how I just build a lot of sites from scratch. I deploy them, they're done, they're live, they're not finished, but it's fine, they're live, that something is on the internet. And I think that's what Jamstack enables from the get-go, and makes you feel good about yourself.
Big time. I think that's a really good point, where it's like the foundation, and you can build things on top of that. But I see a lot of boot camps in education, they skip that foundation, and then you don't understand those building blocks of the web. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey? I think your story is really interesting, to eventually getting to Jamstack.
Yeah. So I did a music degree, and I ended up being a music teacher. And I think that's why I got into DevRel eventually, because the whole teaching thing and wanting to inspire people and get them started and get them into something. But in between being a music teacher and getting into DevRel in 2021, I spent 8 or 9 years in the tech industry as a front-end developer. And what was interesting is that my developer jobs started out with these huge full stack monolithic applications, bespoke. The first dev job I had was for a magazine that they'd even built their own CMS. They did everything themselves. And then I went on to e-commerce that had huge bespoke JavaScript application. That had huge bespoke Java applications that was initially like really monolithic, and they were moving to a microservice architecture. And then I worked for a number of startups, mobile apps, an e-commerce platform itself, again, big kind of monolithic thing. And then I moved into product agency work. And for that, we had to ship really quickly and build lightweight things and build decoupled things to enable to hand those projects over to clients after we'd done the work. And that's when I started getting involved with the Jamstack architecture and the Jamstack approach. What can we do that's as lightweight as possible, that has as few tools as possible to allow us to go faster and build things really well and really quickly and make them really fast. And it was that time that Next.js was like a static site generator. And so I built some things with Next.js, and then things started to change. And then I moved into DevRel, and obviously at Contentful, that was my first DevRel job. Jamstack was really big for the beginning of Contentful, and it was a real core part of why Contentful exists as it does. And so I got further and further into the Jamstack ecosystem and started learning more and more about its roots and what actually started the movement in like the early 2010s with JavaScript frameworks like AngularJS and Backbone.js, and how that led to React, and then how the whole single page application thing led to a simplification of how complex it got. And the thing is, we go in cycles, don't we? Because React got really complicated, and then the Jamstack came about. And React technically was kind of part of the Jamstack, but not really. Jamstack was kind of a reaction to how complicated JavaScript front ends had got. And then, you know, for a few years, we were really going along nicely with statically pre-generated sites for the most part, and adding JavaScript and interactivity when we needed. And then it went full circle again. And now we're just like server-side rendering everything, and everything's shiny and fancy and new, and all the frameworks have all the features. And so now we're back again trying to defend why that's too complicated and why you don't always need that.
Agreed. I think, I completely agree. Like it really does feel like we've come full circle. And I'm interested, where do you feel like it went too far? Where was the half circle that's that world of simplicity that you described at the start?
So I kind of have this thought that I'm trying to cook properly in my head. And it's not fully formed. So like, don't come at me, anyone who watches this. But I kind of feel like when we started moving towards using server-side rendering again for specific use cases, when Next.js started offering both static pages and server-side rendered pages, and then other frameworks followed suit, you know, like you've got Astro, you can do both in. Remix is fully server-side rendered, and then, you know, Nuxt has both options as well. Because people have both options, they automatically defaulted to using server-side rendered because they might need it one day, right? Yeah. And I think also, now this is the undercooked, spicy take I've got. I think also cloud companies have a benefit in peddling SSR as standard and the default, because it uses more resources on the server. It gets people to pay more money. And I'm not accusing anyone of trying to, you know, steal money from people, developers who are building things using server-side rendering, but you get a lot of these templates built in these frameworks, and they are presented to newer developers, perhaps, who don't have this understanding of the differences between statically generated pages and server-side rendered pages. And so say, you know, blog template uses SSR in Next.js throughout the whole project when you do not need it. And that's become more and more commonplace. And so that's where I think we went wrong, because server-side rendering does exist on the Jamstack, on cloud provider platforms, and it's actually pretty easy to get set up. It's become the default. And we've lost the concept of serving statically generated pages because we don't need to. And HTML isn't cool, is it? No one's really thinking how cool it is to serve statically generated HTML. And maybe React has played a part in this, because a lot of new developers are learning React before they're learning HTML. And they're not understanding that the JavaScript and the JSX they're writing has to compile into HTML, a document, to be able to be served in the browser. So I think the oversaturation of those kind of tools, the JavaScript-based templating, has lost the connection to what we're actually delivering to the browser. And especially with newer developers in this hype ecosystem of JavaScript is the best thing ever, we've lost that. I think that's where it started to go wrong.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think you nailed it there. The other bit I'm thinking a lot about more recently is the environmental cost of that. Like, you have these huge server farms computing all this data for what is a static page. It's exactly the same every time. And if it is the same every time, why is that not static? And I was trying to do this calculation the other day of, if all the websites in the world that essentially are static were static, how much would that reduce carbon emissions of the internet? I don't want to throw numbers out because I'm still trying to like get something that is like intellectually honest and I can back, but it's quite a scary number, I think.
Thank you for doing that, because I have had the same thought for years, and I was, number one, a little bit too afraid to run the numbers, but also number two, I put the thought out there once, I think it was on a tweet, and I got like attacked for it. Like, and this is the thing as well, people, if we're going to get onto this subject, people don't want to acknowledge that the world is in danger, and we keep mindlessly consuming, mindlessly deploying these server-side rendered websites, and it all adds up. But the thing is, if you talk about this, you're not taken seriously, unfortunately. And, there are bigger problems in the world than how many pages you server-side render, but at scale, like you say, it has an impact. So I'd love to see those numbers. Please give me the numbers, because I need ammunition to keep talking about this.
I think that's it. Like, once we get some real numbers that we can actually talk about and not just pick apart, like, then that conversation becomes a lot more interesting. Like, I feel like there's just such an overwhelming number of reasons to go static. It's like, okay, if you don't want the performance, if you don't want the security, if you don't want the scalability, you got the environmental and just actual costs, to your point earlier as well.
And it's the mental overheads as well. One of the great things about the Jamstack for me throughout, as my career developed, was when I first started being a front-end developer, not many people know about these, but do you remember httpd.conf files and the server configuration that you had to deal with? And as a front-end developer, you didn't, that wasn't your level of expertise. And it's now just so easy to hook something up to Netlify or whatever and just deploy it without having to think. And I think that empowers people to do more stuff. Maybe it empowers the next person to build a really problem-solving, useful website for humanity, without needing all of that knowledge and that kind of elitist knowledge of computer science and having a computer science degree and things like that. And, kids as young as 5, 6 can deploy websites using the Jamstack architecture and approach, right? And that's something that's pretty special.
Yeah, I think so. It's like, it feels like if you want to get into web, that's the best first step you could take. Understand the fundamentals, HTML and CSS, sprinkling of JavaScript, and not using a framework where you actually understand what everything's doing and you're very close to it. And then once you understand those fundamentals, build on top of it, and that foundation's just going to serve you much better than jumping into something else.
That's another thing, like starting with a framework has become the default.
Yeah.
So say, for example, when I'm streaming on Twitch, and often when I'm starting a new project, I will prototype something and deploy something as a static HTML file. And people will come into the chat and say, why aren't you using Next.js? Why aren't you using React? Why not Angular? And it's like, well, because I don't need to. And so what has made those people think that they need to start with a framework? And again, I think it's the way courses are designed, maybe the way introductions to web dev is designed. Hey, learn React, then you'll be a web developer. Start with this Next.js blog post template, and then you'll learn stuff. It's like, imagine starting with Next.js nowadays as someone completely new to the whole thing. It's mind-boggling, and I don't know where along the way we've lost it. What's interesting, talking about like beginner content and introductory content, is I often feel that the community views true beginner fundamental content as like beneath them a lot of the time. Like the true fundamentals are looked down upon. HTML isn't a programming language, is the common kind of shout you hear from across the Twitter tweets. And it's weird. It's silly, because without HTML, we don't have browser pages. We don't have web. And I'm not sure why that has happened. But as I said before, HTML is not cool, but like, why? Like, accessibility is not cool. And basic fundamental building blocks of web are not cool for some reason. And but maybe that nothing needs to be cool to be like useful and good, but also the cool stuff is what all the kids are going to be, you know, looking for, and what people coming in to web development are going to be looking for. So if they don't view the fundamentals, if they're not told and inspired that the fundamentals of HTML and CSS are cool, they're just going to go straight to React, and it's all going to keep perpetuating itself.
Do you think it's a chicken? I don't know what's the chicken and what's the egg. Is it industry where there's a lot of React jobs and so then all the education becomes React focused, or is it vice versa?
Oh, I don't know. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
You know, you do get a lot of people calling themselves React developers specifically, don't you? And I think it's like maybe an industry thing that has forced people into that. You know, I see a lot of people asking, oh, so I want to get into web dev. Should I start with React? And so I think it's just maybe it's the algorithms of the social media platforms. You know, people see that React content gets a lot of traction, so they'll create more React content. And HTML content, I can speak from experience, gets very little traction. And I am not about to change my approach to education and content just because of that. But that's the thing as well, that there are a lot of loud people saying a lot of loud things, and not enough loud things about HTML and the fundamentals and serving static assets. So I think it's a chicken and chicken situation.
Yeah, I think you're right. So let's bring it back to Jamstack. So I'm with you. I feel like serverless is a useful technology, but including it under this umbrella was like the slippery slope, where it's like, okay, serverless is now Jamstack, so why isn't server-side rendering Jamstack? Okay, well, it is, and it keeps expanding, and then it essentially means modern web development because the umbrella is so large. And because of that, we have a lot of conversations like this about what Jamstack is. And for someone coming into the industry, if we can't agree what Jamstack is, like, how's someone new coming in, how's that a useful word at all? It's not, it's just confusing. And I think that's why it's so important just to be very strong about what it is and what it isn't. And it's fine if it can't solve every problem on the web. It doesn't need to. It just needs to be something tangible. What do you think needs to happen in the Jamstack community for it to be useful moving forward?
I think we need to retire the term Jamstack, honestly, because it has a lot of baggage attached to it. Being a former Netlify employee, Jamstack was heavily tied to Netlify, and Netlify has considerably changed its target audience in the industry, and left Jamstack behind to do what it does. And so I think there's a lot of dissonance there with the term Jamstack because it came from Netlify, and Netlify no longer owns it. But it's automatically associated with Netlify, which it shouldn't be anymore, because it's an architectural concept and companies can't own architectural concepts. So it needs to be called something else, and I don't know what that is yet. But also, it needs to be rebranded, right? It needs to be rebranded into this cool hip thing. Branding sells, right? You see how you see how like branding like Vercel's works, right? Everything's shiny, everything's cool. People who love Vercel will jump on anything that they release, regardless of what it is. You get a lot of other companies who do the same. And it's old, like it looks old now, like the pink and the orange and the white, and it looks dated. Yeah. And so, but I'm not sure who needs to own this, because again, we now don't really have an owner, and that's the problem. Every other community out there has an owner or some defined owners who set strategy, set direction in whatever way that is. It's a bit like working for a company that has no mission or goals, and has really outdated branding. And then we need to, it kind of sounds like I'm brainstorming on a DevRel strategy, right? And a DevRel strategy would include things like, right, so we need to infiltrate the market and the community by employing influencers to talk about Jamstack or whatever the new thing is in different ways, and innovative ways, and positive ways, and get them to show people the potential of what you can do with this architectural approach. And again, right, architectural approaches aren't cool either, are they? Like no one is no one's tweeting about architectural approaches and getting like traction with that. Oh, what if I just decouple this with this, and look, nothing else has to happen because my assets are served statically from a CDN. Like, because developers also like to put in, this sounds really weird, right? Developers like to put in effort, right? And show that they're capable of things, and to show how clever they are. But you don't need any of that with the Jamstack. You can just write an HTML file and deploy it, and there you are. And there's not enough interest in that kind of simplicity. There's not enough hype around that kind of simplicity. And I'm not sure that kind of approach will ever be attractive to the general web development communities that we see on the internet right now. So we need to find ways to make it innovative and fun and exciting. Like, what ridiculous things can we do on the Jamstack while still serving statically pre-generated assets?
I think that's a great approach to that problem, because I think so often as an industry, we're like, okay, this can't be solved statically, so I have to use dynamic. But what if you just keep that constraint? This has to be static. We have a project called PageFind that has purely static search, and it can do it across a website of hundreds of thousands of pages, and it shards up all the indexes, so it's very performant and fast. And it's static. It can do what Algolia does, but purely static and open source.
Amazing.
Like, I think we just need more innovation like that, where more things are static, and it's not just seen as this very limited approach. When you were talking, you kind of reminded me of, I think this is a relevant analogy, the iPhone launch, where before the iPhone, you have these very complicated phones with a million buttons, and the thinking around phones was, okay, well, this is like a mini computer, so we need a keyboard and we need all of these things. And the iPhone like went back to simplicity. No buttons, no nothing, just a screen. And I think static is like that. It is so elegant and simple and like beautiful, and we just need more people to evangelize it and make it cool, to your point.
Yeah. But you'll often find people will be reluctant to do that, because in this economy and in this economy of algorithms, they won't get the same traction. They won't get the same likes and shares, and people will be like, what are you talking about? Why are you talking about this simple rubbish? And speaking from experience, right? But you're right, it needs to be cooler. And I kind of wish I would love to take on the challenge of like reviving the Jamstack, or whatever it should be called, as like my full-time job, and just strategizing around, what could we do? What kind of campaigns could we devise that, Jamstack game show, or something like that. Yes. Like, how can we make this like really cool? You're given this, maybe one of the challenges could be you're given a very like complicated like website to make. Like, it needs dynamic, it needs this, it needs something, but you need to solve the problem using static only, a bit like you solved the problem with your search, right? And how fun could that be if we had unlimited money and things like that, and resources? But I don't know. Like, I've been thinking about this for a long time, like over a year. I've been thinking, when I was at Netlify, and the Jamstack Slack turned into the Discord, and then like no one was coming there to do anything. And we didn't have the resources internally to support the community as well at the time anyway, given what was going on. And I just watched it peter away before my eyes. And so I've been thinking about it for a long time, but I can't remember what your question was now. But
so I want to run on that idea of brainstorming. So I want to throw some names at you for branding. So I'll throw 3 at you.
Okay.
So the community could be called pre-builders. It's a community of pre-builders who like to pre-build. The community could be called static first, where it's the default should be static. It should always be static first, and then do something else if it can't be static. And the third one I want to throw at you is Jamstack Plus. It's the next evolution of Jamstack.
I hate all of them.
Okay.
I hate all of them. I'll tell you why. So one of the problems with Jamstack initially is that it's a name of a community or an approach defined by the architecture, which we know doesn't work, because architectures evolve and change. And even Netlify itself turned Jamstack into composable. So your pre-builders, again, it's like you're defining the name of a community person just by the fact that they like to pre-build their static pages, which it sounds a bit weird. Again, static first. I mean, yes, it's a great concept, but it's so boring and dry. It's like, that is worse. What can we do that's as lightweight as possible, that has as few tools as possible to allow us to go faster and build things really well and really quickly and make them really fast? It has the same problems as Jamstack, I think. I don't have any better ideas right now, but I think it needs to be. So what I used to like doing when I was a tech lead, I used to like having really abstract team names for the teams I was leading, because, not like a project team name that you get sometimes, like Project CMS or Project web page, you know, something really random like a periodic table element or something. And that concept in itself brought people together, strangely, under this abstract term. And their team wasn't named after the thing they were doing or the thing they were building. They existed as a group of individuals in their own right, and they just happened to be building this website or do this project. And I think Jamstack could benefit from the same, just a name for a group of people who like to do things in a certain way and believe in the power of fundamentals and saving resources and doing things the good, simple, elegant way. But that's not defining them. And it gives them something else that's probably cooler as well to live under and define themselves by. And it also creates intrigue in external communities as well. So let's just say a random periodic table element, right? Osmium, right? Osmium. That was the name of one of my teams that I led. Say you call it the Osmium community, and what's that? Oh, very exciting, very intriguing. What do they do? Oh, yeah, they do this. That's pretty cool. And you know, but that person over there is part of the Osmium community, but they do something slightly different, but they still have their fundamental, you know, beliefs that static first. They like to pre-build stuff, but they're Osmium. And branding could be a lot cooler with something like that as well. So I would encourage that kind of thinking, to be honest, and don't define a community name by what they do, because what they do will ultimately change and evolve and may have different flavors and may have different approaches. But when you take that approach, it means you are more likely inviting more people in than excluding people just because that one project they did needed to use SSR mainly, you know. And I think there's that kind of all or nothing kind of thought around Jamstack. I'm using Next.js for this, so I'm not in Jamstack anymore. Or, you know, but I did build my portfolio with 11T or something like that. But I know I'm doing this now, so Jamstack can't have me. And I think if you design a revival around something more abstract, my hypothesis is that it might be more successful.
Yeah.
But don't quote me on that.
No, I think you made lots of interesting points there. I think Jamstack originally did have quite a tight definition. It was an acronym and it was a stack, and then it just became a noun. And that's part of the baggage of Jamstack that you mentioned earlier. But I feel like the term keep widening for that reason, like not to exclude anyone. But the problem if it's not well defined, it just becomes so wide that it's hard to have a community around, because then it's just a web development community and you can take whatever approach you want.
You can define it, but you don't need to define it by the name of the community, right? And I think that's where you take away a little bit of a barrier and you remove the baggage. You know, you could package it and position it as something new, because there are a lot of developers who will think at this point that it is new, because they haven't encountered it yet. And, you know, yes, you can't deny the roots of the Jamstack in this if you are launching something new. But if you position it as Jamstack, people are going to Google Jamstack. Oh, it's been around since 2014, 2015. It's old news. I'm not going to care about it. But so it has to, because, you know, we're not raving about tech from the early 2000s, are we? We are far away from those approaches, and tech moves very fast. And I think it's moving exponentially fast as well, because it's a bit like evolution. If you look at the tech from the early 2000s, it only feels like 2 or 3 generations away from where we are now. But from the Jamstack, from the 2014 to 2015, it feels like there's even more generations of tech and cycles in that time period. So it's going to move even faster and even faster. So Jamstack's going to feel even more ancient in a year, 2 years, 5 years. But I think the point is that what people need to understand is that it works for a reason. Like, for example, the English language has changed over time, over hundreds of years. But the point of the English language is the communication that it gives, right? Mm-hmm. And yes, the web has changed over time, over 30, 40 years or whatever. But the point is to deliver HTML documents to the browser. Yeah. You can't get away from that. I don't know how to really package it, but it seems like maybe it's so ingrained in the web that it doesn't matter anymore. Like, communication is so ingrained in our lives as human beings that we don't even like give it a second thought. So maybe it's not about having its own community, and maybe it's just meant to be part of everything else. Maybe it's become so big and so valid that it doesn't even need to be a thing anymore. I don't know.
Well, to that point, that would be great, but then who's going to evangelize a static approach?
Yeah. No one will they? No one will. No one will. Because there aren't frameworks out there. There aren't cool tech frameworks that promote that anymore.
Yeah. Like, I think that's what the umbrella does, is it groups people under this collective idea and it gives a common language to it. And through that, you have influence on the wider community because it's like a package and it's concentrated and everyone's speaking the same language. And I think that's what we're missing with static approaches. The evangelism just isn't there because the concentration of content isn't there. If we have everyone kind of doing tutorials, but there's no home for it, it just doesn't compound. Yeah, that's what we're going to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was a really great conversation. I think there's so many good ideas in here. And I'm keen to talk more in the future. So thank you so much for coming on today, Salma.
Definitely. Thank you for having me. And you know, full disclaimer, my uncooked spicy thought, take it or leave it, but don't come at me, anyone who sees this.
That's it for today's interview. Find out more at thefutureofjamstack.org.